And this job was particularly difficult because of the nature of the piece and the sensitivity and the nature of trauma and what that character was going through. And it does take it out of you. I mean, it does. I've accepted that now, and you just need sort of more breaks in between. You need downtime afterwards. You need to find a way of downing that energy once you come off set. So I use exercise a lot and meditation, and you just look after yourself in the process of filming alongside. But it always takes something from you, but that's like the joy of it too.
This is an audience of your fellow SAG-AFTRA actors. Yeah. And I always like to start by asking, how did you get your SAG card? But knowing that you are coming from the UK, you might have been working for a while before you got your American SAG card.
Yeah, I was trying to work this out, and I think it was the Lone Ranger.
Really? Okay, yeah. Wow.
I think I was about 29. I'd been working in the UK for 6 years and had done Jane Eyre, I'd done Luther, I'd done Small Island, various things, lots of stage plays. And then, I put myself on tape. I was putting myself on tape for lots of things at the time, put myself on tape in the UK with a casting director there and thought, I'm never going to get this, but put myself on tape anyway. And then, I got the call from Gore Verbinski that he wanted me to go out there and screen tests in the US. Wow. And then got the Lone Ranger, which was amazing. Yeah, so that was my SAG card. That's when I got that.
But you had already done Luther at that point, so you were pretty established.
I was established in in the UK, and I'd done, like I said, I'd done quite a lot of TV and theatre there. So it was and that was a huge deal getting that job. He'd just come off the back of The Pirates, so it was Johnny Depp, it was Armie Hammer, it was all that. So it was kind of a big deal for me to get that. And it was exciting. It was the sort of most amazing American experience, studio experience. The first day on set I had to pinch myself. I remember I was in this full 1850s garb on a steam engine train, which had been built for the film, on a sort of human train set in New Mexico with Tom Wilkinson. And I thought, this is amazing. I mean, films don't get made like that anymore when everything's real and there's no green screen at all. It was extraordinary. It was an amazing film to be part of.
Well, congratulations on The Woman in the Wall. I know this comes to us from Joe Murtaugh, who I know mainly as a writer from projects like American Animals and Calm with Horses. What did you sort of know about the project coming into it? Because it's a murder mystery, but a psychological story. And it also deals with this shameful piece of history, the Magdalene laundries. Yeah. They tell you it doesn't sum up into like a 20-second elevator pitch for people.
No, so they sent me a pilot probably about 4 years ago now, and I instantly responded to it. It was such a brilliant opening, and also, the end of the episode was so surprising to me. But like you said, it was dealing with lots of things at the same time. It was about this incredibly sort of traumatic part of Irish history that I knew about, but didn't know the extent to what this show goes into the detail. I'd seen Philomena, I'd seen the Magdalene sisters, so I knew a little bit about it. But I loved the way that Joe had sort of how he'd placed the lens on it through a genre lens. So it was through the trope of horror, psychological horror, and it was through crime thriller and caper. And it had this amazing sort of dark humor at the heart of it. So I thought, actually, this is a really smart way of placing this quite traumatic piece of history into something that's more accessible, and that we can sort of get this messaging across through genre and to a wider audience. And it also meant that there was humor in it, which was really necessary. So I loved it. I loved how surprising the character of Lorna was. And I thought this kind of work needs to be made. We need to get that story out there.
You mentioned that you were, familiar with Magdalene laundries. I'm so glad you mentioned Philomena, because that was sort of my entree. And I always feel bad when I use movies as history lessons, but I didn't know how well known it was in the UK.
Well, a bit probably the same as here. I mean, it's one of those things that's a kind of dark part of history that's very recent, actually. So it's not talked about yet. People can't process it that well at the moment. It's still starting, people are starting to process what actually happened and to admit it happened, to reconcile what happened. But that takes a long time, actually. So I think the fact that only 2 pieces of drama had been really made about it. There was one play as well that had been made about it that came out of Ireland. But really, there was so little around it that it was still so full of shame. And so I think I didn't know that much. I knew the Philomena story. I knew these were brutal places where women were put and placed if they were pregnant out of wedlock. And I knew their babies were sold into adoption by the church, by the Catholic Church. So I knew that, but I didn't really know how brutal they were. I didn't realize that women in their 40s were going in these places. I didn't realize that women also who weren't pregnant, it was just young girls who were considered, I don't know, naughty or gregarious or loud or attractive.
Yeah.
Lots of girls were put in those places just for standing out. And it's brutal. It's kind of, and it was so, the church had so much power in that country. And people are still discovering and trying to find their children that were adopted out, and those children are still trying to find their parents. I mean, these women who went through those laundries are still alive and surviving now. So it was very sensitive material, and taking on this show was definitely felt a bit of a risk because we were dealing with real people's experiences. Of course, it's fictionalized, the show is, but we were sort of drawing on those real experiences. So the pressure of that and the responsibility of that felt quite enormous, but it felt like it was an endeavor worth doing and needed to get out there, that story. And people needed to understand that this happened very recently.
Since there wasn't really much out there about it, where did you even begin with your research? Or I know that Joe is kind of a research hound. I'm sure he probably provided you with a lot as well.
Yeah, so the team behind the show were obviously gathering loads of research material. There are, of course, like I said, the fictional adaptations or things that have gone out there, the films. There's also lots of books. There's a great book that I read called The Light in the Window, which is an account from a woman who was brought in as a nurse, a wet nurse, to help the girls in pregnancy and birth. So she was between the nuns and the girls. And so she has a really interesting account of observing both sides. But there's a public domain full of people's testimonies. There is a charity that has kind of gathered oral testimonies of women that went through these places. So you can go online, and everyone can go online and look at some of those oral testimonies. So that is something that they are doing in Ireland at the moment, is trying to gather people's experiences as a form of sort of reconciliation and dealing with this.
So like a website or?
Yeah. Oh. We can put that online. I mean, that's an amazing resource that Joe used, the research team used, I used, and you can read these personal accounts from these women.
There's so much going on with Lorna. I'm curious where you even began in your research. In addition to learning about the laundries, this is someone who is dealing with trauma. She also suffers from sleepwalking, which I think is a fascinating thing to study. There's so much. Where did you even begin?
Well, with the reading, I love the research. It's part of it's my favorite part of doing the job. Almost is that the learning and the curiosity about how I put this person together, how you function and, make this person exist. What was difficult with this show as well was the different genres. I had to find a character that could traverse not only the sort of reality, the social realism of some of those scenes, but then also the horror genre and the comedy and the psychological horror. So I had to find a character that could kind of, traverse all of those sides. In terms of the kind of initial form of research, I went to Ireland. I went to the west of Ireland, and I hung out there for a bit just to pick up the accent, but also just to sort of explore the world out there. I went to sort of where this was set. Did lots of reading. I talked to Catherine Corliss, who was the woman who had gathered. She's like sort of representative of all the survivors. So she gave me loads of stories of the women that had gone through these institutions. I then worked very diligently with an accent coach. I looked up sleep. There's a scene, having to do sleepwalking. And I thought, how on earth am I going to do that? And so I researched online a woman who puts all her sleepwalking videos online.
No way.
Yeah, she's amazing. She's just incredible. Because I thought, okay, everyone does it like a zombie. That's quite obvious. Yep. What is it actually? What happens in sleepwalking and what's going on? So I found this woman, and she turns into sort of a baby when she's sleepwalking and stuffing things down her pants and chucking stuff and talking to plants and all sorts. So I was like, this is amazing. I'm going to use this. It suddenly gave me a key into how to play those scenes. That she's not really functioning, her body, she's not quite in control of her movements. So it gave me a physical way to approach those scenes.
On YouTube?
Yeah.
What do we do before YouTube?
I don't know, but it's an amazing. But yeah, I found her. She's brilliant. Just look up sleepwalking videos and you'll find her. So I thought that's also a really great way to kind of balance humor as well in the piece.
Yeah.
I wanted to find a way of balancing the trauma with the humor. And she always felt to me like she's a real survivor. She's someone that obviously was put in that place because she was pregnant, but she was also someone that was probably, stood out in her own way. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to find the essence of that underneath, that she might have been knocked down in her life, but still the essence of her was there. So there was a kind of a anarchy to her slightly. And there's some kind of charisma and quirk. That's why she was put there in the first place. And so that was always the thing with me. It's like, find the humor and the lightness of her, even in these very dark moments. And even though she's suffering something huge, is that she's got an anarchy and a sort of charm to her and a drive. She wants to survive. So it was a really wonderful character that kept revealing itself actually throughout the 6 episodes.
I'm so glad you stressed the humor of it, because at first when I would laugh, I would sort of feel bad. I'd be like, am I allowed to laugh at this?
Yeah.
But it's very funny in the way that life can be funny. And I assume that was, in the script from the beginning, but was that a tone that you kind of had to find on the set? Or, sometimes it's even in editing. You don't know when you're performing and how it's going to read.
I mean, I think when I read the script, obviously there's jokes in there that Joe has written in, certainly between the 2 coppers, but I always found that Lorna, the things that she did were quite surprising and funny. And she was very surprising. She was very kind of spontaneous or instinctive. There was something that you as an audience weren't quite sure where that came from. But I loved it. I loved that it kept it kind of alive for the audience watching her. So I had to find out where that came from with her and where that sort of slight naughtiness or abandon came. And there was a sense that this is a woman that has been told she's mad for her whole life. Like she's been gaslit, that this experience didn't happen to her, that she's a bad mother, that it's her fault. So there's the shame that she feels. I wanted to have her have that shame for the first few eps, but as it goes on, that she starts to break through her shame, and actually she's got nothing to lose, by episode 3. And so actually she uses the sense that everyone thinks she's mad to act more mad, and so what? So I loved the freedom that she found by being an outsider. And I thought, okay, that's, rather than being ashamed of that, she can actually now use it to get what she wants and to fight for the things she really wants and fight for the truth. So I thought the humor, like you said, bringing that in as well, but that's essentially who she is. I mean, there's a line that gave that away quite early on, which the actor Mark says to me, it's the kind of guy that an old flame. And he says, you were always the funny one. So I thought, okay, we have to find, and funny can mean many things. It's not just in comedic lines, but quirk, I took that as, slightly eccentric or sees the world slightly differently.
You mentioned also doing an Irish accent, and you're so good with accents, but this is a very specific one. It's and also you have Daryl McCormick right there, who's Irish and probably judging you. Can you talk a little bit more about the specificness of the accent and also how you perfected it?
It's quite interesting because Ireland, like the UK, like America, has loads of different accents. I mean, you've got the Dublin accent, but you have the West Coast, you've got, the middle of Ireland, which is very different from the West Coast. So I wanted, because it's set in the West, and I thought, okay, I'm going to look for a specifically West Coast accent. And we used someone called Cora Staunton. My voice coach came up with this woman. She's a GA. GA is Irish football. And she's a GA player called Cora Staunton. And I love the quality of her voice. It wasn't just the accent, it was the placement of where the voice is. So my voice is here, but I went to like a place down like here. So I completely changed the placement of my voice because, I don't know, there was something caught about her voice. There was something trapped slightly and sort of dulled and flat about that sound, which I thought was really a quality that Lorna, whether she was like that initially or whether that's happened to her over the course of her life, I thought there was something interesting in that. So I copied her, and I sort of meant listening over and over and over to various interviews that Cora had done. But yeah, it's quite different to other accents. Like everyone was doing a West Coast, but there are some accents in there which are from slightly different. I mean, Gerald's from Tipperary initially. So he's got a slightly different Irish accent anyway. And then obviously lots of people are from Dublin. Lots of those Irish actors are from Dublin that came over doing it. So it's a very different sound. See, I was being very specific to a very particular place in Ireland. And, but I love the quality of it.
When you're doing an accent, do you have to sort of stay in it between takes? I mean, not if you break for lunch or something, but I understand like it can be so hard to get there. You don't want to break out of it.
I did on this one. I often switch in and out, but I actually went for it. For some reason, because I knew we were also shooting in Northern Ireland. We weren't shooting in Ireland. And obviously Northern Ireland is such a different accent. So I'm surrounded by a crew of Northern Irish. So I thought I have to stick in my accent for this, or, in the Irish accent for this, because I'm going to get confused. I'm going to start picking up Northern Irish twang. So I did for this. And I actually really enjoyed it. I loved speaking as her. It was so much easier to just enter into the day with that accent and stay in it. I think you get less inhibited as you get older about doing that. When you're younger, you feel slightly fraud-like putting on an accent when you're talking to people, when you're eating lunch. But I actually found it was much easier this time round just to sort of really embed it. So yeah, I stayed in it the whole time.
Can you also talk about crafting the character from the outside? Because I think the way a character dresses and walks and holds herself says so much. And, Lorna is weighed down by so much unresolved trauma, among other things. I just, to like hold yourself like that physically, I wonder if it ever got hard.
Yeah, I'm quite a physical actor. So if I feel something emotionally, it comes through my body quite naturally and instinctively. And I think it's not like sometimes I look for a walk or a way or a manner, but it sort of happens through emotion, to be honest. It comes through feeling how that character might feel in that moment. And my body just naturally either curves or stands up straight or whatever it does. It finds a space. I always knew that she was physical. I mean, the things that she does in the house, she's always knocking down walls and like she's, burning things and setting fire to stuff. So I thought, okay, she's physical. And even though she's incredibly fragile emotionally and is dealing with something horrifying every day and traumatic every day, she is physically strong and she is going to fight. She's a mother that is also fighting for her child. So I wanted her to be incredibly, just physically strong. And that's also a form of defense. She's someone that isn't going to be intimate with people. She isn't going to let people in. She has got a very strong, big guard up. So she sort of has a barrier around her, an armor. So that is kind of held in her body the whole time. I think for me, physicality forms, like I say, from the study of the emotions. And once they're in place and once I'm comfortable in her, that all sort of starts forming itself and fitting. And as the show goes on, you can see her loosening, having more agency, getting more confident and standing up for herself. And physically, then that changes. So yeah, it's a major part for me, always the physicality of a character.
Is it ever a hard place to be because, you're putting yourself through these emotional scenes, you're the physicality of it all, and it's acting, but also your body doesn't always know the difference.
Yeah, I've learned. I mean, no, I haven't learned. I still push myself too much. I mean, that's a lie. What am I talking about? I can't. It's yes, it takes a lot, and this job was particularly difficult because of the nature of the piece and the sensitivity and the nature of trauma and what that character was going through. And it does take it out of you. I mean, it does. I've accepted that now, and you just need sort of more breaks in between. You need downtime afterwards. You need to find a way of downing that energy once you come off set. So I use exercise a lot and meditation, and you just look after yourself in the process of filming alongside. But it always takes something from you, but that's like the joy of it too. But yeah, I've just learned to sort of manage that a little bit better than I had before.
I think everyone here has probably seen the series, but just a little bit of a warning. I just want to get into spoiler territory, if you don't mind. I just want to ask you, what was your most challenging scene or moment, and how did you prepare for it?
There are quite a few in this. I mean, I think the stuff. I mean, I found some of the stuff I found some quite hard, like I said, was the traversing of the different genres. And I found all the stuff with the women, I found very easy because in a way that was where all the work was grounded, where it made sense to me. The show made complete sense of why we were doing it, who's it for. We're telling these women's stories. This is where it all feels important. They were very moving and hard, but in a way, they were kind of the easier ones to sort of get to grips with. For me, it was always trying to find the balance of those other scenes. So the horror edges or the stuff inside the wall and making them make sense and believable. So that stuff was hard for me. And like I said, sleepwalking wasn't hard in the end, but I was worrying about how I was going to do that. And then I found the night before, I literally found that piece of material. I thought, okay, that's opened it up for me. The scene that was actually very interesting that we did which is one of the women's scene, was in episode 2. And it's quite an odd scene. It's when I reveal my story. And it's in front of the group of women. And everyone's telling their stories a bit. And then Lorna isn't going to say anything. And then she does. And she does it in quite a where she thinks she's talking to herself, or she thinks she's having a memory. She doesn't realize she's speaking out loud. And when we were talking to Joe, we decided to shoot it that way. It wasn't originally going to be like that. It was going to be more of a kind of obvious, she offers up a story. But I just felt it doesn't feel real for Lorna to offer something up at this stage. She's not someone that does that. So, or it feels like she wouldn't be that vulnerable with those people. So then Harry and I and Joe worked out a way of how do we do this in quite an unusual way. And we go into her psychology and her subjectivity. And we're kind of inside her own head as she's having that memory. And then she realized she's being watched. And Harry and I filmed it the night before on a little iPhone, sent it to Joe and said, will this work? So we were working on the stuff at night as well to work out how we could land that in a way that felt real, but also lent itself to her sort of weird, subjective kind of point of view as well. But I found, and even the scene at the end a bit with the doctor was pretty hard. Trying to sort of go from something very almost light and hopeful to then something so devastating when he tells her, he gaslights her basically and says, it threatens her and tells her she's mad. That was quite a hard scene to kind of shape and go from, 0 to 100. There were lots of those, but I always love doing those scenes because it's such a challenge. So you're kind of constantly, every time you do the take, it's different and you're finding new levels to it and you're stretching it in different ways. That's always a sign of good writing as well, is that you can keep finding new things in the scenes.
On the day of, do you have any, I don't want to say tricks, that's not the right word, but anything that helps you? Do you listen to music before a scene? Because I just think it's hard, like, walking from wherever you are just to get on that set, trying to like stay in that mindset and then having a giant camera in your face.
Yeah.
And then all eyes on you.
And often you've got no time. I mean, that's the other thing. It's like the pace of TV these days is so fast that you haven't got much time to kind of get yourself into a zone. I have learnt a bit, though, that to sort of try and push certain things also doesn't help. If you can find something as moving without it, you having to end in tears. You can find something as simple with a different energy. So I actually feel what's becoming more useful to me now is just to sort of accept where you are in the moment and to keep listening to the person opposite and just to find what energy is you can create with that person. To me, it's always about the connection of the person opposite you, and you'll find something magic in that, as long as you keep listening and watching for it. But yeah, occasionally, sometimes though I feel that when my energies are, it's day to day. You just got to capture whatever energy you're in and use it for the scene, I think.
I mean, you also have this wonderful ensemble that you're working with. I mentioned McCormick, and I have to imagine that helps immensely to, be working with co-stars like this.
Yeah, I mean, and, Hilda Faye, who's extraordinary. I mean, Simon as well. We had such a great cast. Every single person was brilliant and brought something different and made me as a character change. And I think that's always, if you think of yourself, you're never the same with your husband as you are with your mum or your son or your, colleague. You're very different each time you talk to someone else. And so I think that's always a really interesting way to approach a character, is that different people make you do different things and make you act differently. So with a bunch of actors like that, it was very easy to sort of respond to them and to interact with them in a sort of genuine, authentic way. Loved. That's partly why I love those group women scenes. They were just, every actor was brilliant in those scenes, and they're all very different.
And you have a young actress who plays a young Lorna, Abby Fitz. I don't know if there was any sort of coordination or like she studied you a little. It's obviously you're in two different time periods, but I find it interesting.
I mean, we look quite different, so that was always quite hard to sort of make us look similar. But we did, and there were some scenes that we did which were more sort of the trauma scenes that would be in the same space, but like different periods. So there were scenes that the sort of ghost version of her almost, or the image of her and me facing her we did come across each other, but it never made the final cut. So there were some bits on set that we did, but they didn't feature in the end product. So I got to meet her, and, she was great, brilliant, and a lovely presence on camera. And that's such an important story side, that beginning of Lorna's story and the origin of her story. So we needed that to be powerful, and she did an amazing job.
You also mentioned one of the directors, Harry Woodliff. I hope I'm not mispronouncing that. Okay. And I believe Rachna Suri was the other director.
Rachna.
Okay.
Yeah.
See, I got ahead of myself. The first one.
Harry is easy.
Well, that's why I was like, it's probably pronounced like Harai or something. But I know it's 6 episodes, but how much does it help to have, 2 directors at the helm? Sometimes I think on episodic television, there's a joy, but also a challenge in, changing directors every week.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, I've worked with Harry before. We did and she wrote and directed a film that I produced called True Things. And I have a real shorthand with her. I love working with her because she moves the camera emotionally. So she's sort of, it's very fluid, the movement of the camera. It's always quite subjective. So it's very up close. And I feel she sees something, or she identifies, or she draws something out of me as an actress, which I trust her. I trust her, how she's seeing me. And I also think it's just, she's so attuned to emotions. So it was very easy working with her. I'd worked with her before we had a shorthand, and she was doing 4 of the 6 episodes. And to me, as much as an actor, you want to create those relationships with your director. You want to be together collaborating and working out the story and having a journey and deciding that together. So if you have too many directors, it often is very difficult for that director to have any ownership over the material, and for you to sort of get to a point where you feel trusted and safe in that environment. So I would always prefer to have one director that has a vision, that's leading, that you can collaborate with. It's always much more beneficial, I think, to have less than more. But of course, not always possible. And they have to prep. I mean, for a director to do all 6 episodes, or it's very difficult for them to be able to prep the whole thing. So that's why you need someone else to come in. But it was nice. And you can see on the screen actually how different they were in terms of styles. I mean, Rakshan was also brilliant, but she held the camera back a lot more, and it was much more conventional. And she had a different style of approach to directing, but she was brilliant. It was nice and refreshing to have that as well. So the contrast, I mean, it was vital to have women doing it as well, I think, for this story. But they were both brilliant.
That's something that I'm not sure people realize, that Harry is a woman.
Yes, sorry, it's Harriet is her name, but she calls herself Harry.
That's Harriet. That makes sense. Okay. Because I remember kind of thinking like, that's strange. You'd think they have a female director. And someone was like, they do.
Yeah. No, she was brilliant, I think. And it was really essential because Joe obviously wrote the thing, and we had a very predominantly male producing team. So it was really vital to get the female lens on this story and to really crack those female survivor stories and make sure that we kept serving that throughout the whole show. So with myself producing and Harry directing, we managed that.
It's such a great series. And before we go, I want to remind everyone that all the episodes are streaming now on Paramount Plus with Showtime. And I just want to say, on behalf of the SAG-AFTRA Foundation, thank you so much for sharing your experiences, process, and craft with your fellow performers. Thank you so much for being here.
No, thanks for having me. What a joy. Thank you.